The man didn't knock. He walked into Catherine's section like he owned the floor, the building, and every breath inside it. Because for most of his life, he had owned everything he looked at. His eyes found her before she even turned around, and when she did, the tray slipped in her hand. Not because she was clumsy, because James Varelli was standing 15 feet away, staring at her stomach, her 4.5-month stomach. The silence between them swallowed the noise of the entire restaurant. Then he smiled, slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that had never once meant warmth, and said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Did you really think you could hide from me forever?" Well, if you want to know what she said back and what happened next, make sure you subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me your city or country. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to where it all started. The night Catherine Vale decided to disappear, she didn't take much. A single duffel bag, $43 and some change. A phone she planned to throw into the first river she crossed, and a secret she hadn't told anyone yet, not even the man whose child she was already carrying. She stood at the door of the penthouse suite for a long time, longer than she should have. The lights of Miami spread out below the floor-to-ceiling windows like something out of a movie, all gold and blue and completely indifferent to the fact that her entire world was falling apart. James was downstairs at a dinner she'd been told was business. She knew better. She had been his secretary for 2 years. She knew what his business dinners looked like, who attended them, and why men sometimes left those dinners looking like they'd aged 10 years in 90 minutes. She had loved him anyway. That was the part she couldn't forgive herself for. She picked up the bag, walked to the elevator, and pressed the lobby button without letting herself look back at the suite. If she looked back, she wasn't going to leave. The elevator doors closed. She left. That was 4 months and 16 days ago. Now she was standing in the middle of the Serafina dining room in Fort Lauderdale, carrying a tray with 2 plates of risotto and a Caesar salad, wearing a uniform that was slightly too tight around her middle, and doing the only thing she had gotten genuinely good at in the past 4 months, pretending everything was fine. "Table 7 is getting impatient," said Marco, sliding past her with a wine bottle tucked under his arm. Marco was 23, charming in the way that required zero effort, and he had absolutely no idea that the woman he worked beside had once coordinated international wire transfers for one of the most dangerous men on the eastern seaboard. "Table 7 can wait 30 seconds, Catherine said. "Tell that to the guy in the suit who just asked if you were the waitress or the manager." She delivered the risotto. She smiled at the impatient man in the suit. She refilled 2 water glasses without spilling anything, which on a good day felt like an achievement. She was 6 weeks away from showing in a way that could no longer be explained away by bloating or a heavy lunch, and she had spent the last 3 weeks quietly panicking about what happened next. She had a plan. It was not a great plan. It involved saving enough money to move to Tallahassee, where a college friend named Dora had offered her a couch and a connection to a midwife who asked fewer questions than most. It involved not thinking about James Varelli at all, which she was managing approximately 4 hours out of every 24. The other 20 hours, she thought about him constantly, not in the way she used to, not with that particular combination of longing and exasperation that had defined 2 years of her life. She thought about him the way you think about a storm that almost destroyed your house, with a kind of careful, exhausted respect for how close you came. She was thinking about him when the front door of the restaurant opened. She wasn't looking at the door. She was facing the other direction, writing down a dessert order for the couple at table 4, an older man and woman celebrating their anniversary with matching expressions of quiet joy that Catherine found both beautiful and painful to look at. She wasn't looking at the door, but she felt it. The way the air in the room changed, the way conversations didn't stop exactly, but softened, like someone had turned the volume down on the entire building by a fraction. She knew that feeling. She'd felt it in boardrooms and hotel lobbies and private airport terminals. She'd felt it every time James walked into a space and the space rearranged itself around him. She turned around slowly, the way you move when part of you already knows, and the rest of you is still pretending it doesn't. James Varelli was standing at the host station. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, no tie, his collar open one button. He looked exactly like he always looked. like a man who had never in his life questioned whether he belonged somewhere, because he had always ensured that every room he entered was already his. He was speaking to the host, not looking around, apparently giving his reservation name with the same calm, unhurried manner he applied to everything. Then he looked up, and he found her, immediately, without scanning the room, without searching. Like he already knew exactly where she was standing. Catherine didn't move. The pen in her hand stopped writing mid-letter. She was aware distantly that the anniversary couple was still waiting for her to finish taking their order. James's eyes dropped to her stomach, came back up to her face. His expression didn't change exactly, but something shifted behind it. Something she didn't have a name for. Something that looked less like the composed, controlled reaction she would have expected, and more like a man who had just taken a step and found the ground wasn't where he thought it was. "Miss?" The woman at table 4 touched her arm gently. "Are you all right?" Catherine looked down at her notepad. She had written the letter C and then a series of jagged lines where her pen had dragged. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice came out steady. She didn't know how. "What was the dessert again?" She didn't go back to the host station. She went to the kitchen, pushed through the swinging door, set her notepad on the counter, and stood there for a moment with her hands flat on the stainless steel surface while the line cooks moved around her with the particular focused urgency of people who did not have time for whatever was happening with the waitress. "You look like you're going to be sick," said Elena, the sous chef, without looking up from what she was plating. "I'm not going to be sick." "Okay. I just need a minute. You've got about 45 seconds before Marco comes back here looking for the Henderson's app order." Catherine picked up her notepad. She went back out. James had been seated at table 12. Of course he had. Table 12 was the best table in the restaurant, positioned near the window, slightly separated from the rest of the dining room, favored by people who valued the combination of being seen and being unreachable. She had requested, twice in the past 3 months, to be taken off that section. The manager had agreed both times and then forgotten immediately. He was alone. No security visible, though she knew better than to think that meant he actually came alone. James Varelli did not go anywhere without at least 2 people within shouting distance who were paid to put themselves between him and any problem that arose. They were probably at the bar, or parked outside, or both. She told herself she could do this. She told herself she had handled harder things than this. She walked to table 12. "Good evening," she said. Her voice did not shake. "Can I start you with something to drink?" James looked up at her from the menu. He had the menu open, but she was willing to bet significant money he hadn't read a word of it. "Water," he said, "and we need to talk." "I'm working." "I know you're working. I'm aware of where you work, Catherine. I've been aware for about 6 weeks. She felt the floor do something unsteady beneath her. "Then why?" "Because I was trying to figure out the right approach." He said it simply, without accusation. "I was trying to decide whether to come here or wait for you to come back on your own. I wasn't coming back." "I know." He set the menu down. "So I came here instead." She stood there with her order pad and her pen and all 47 things she had thought she might say to him if she ever saw him again, and not a single one of them was accessible to her right now. "Water," she said finally. "I'll be right back." She made Marco take the drink order. She told him she had a conflict of interest with a customer, which was technically the most accurate thing she'd said all week. Marco gave her a look that suggested he wanted more information, then looked at table 12, then looked at her stomach, then back at table 12 and said, "Oh," with the quiet devastation of a man whose crush had just become significantly more complicated. He's not," she stopped. "Just take the table." "Already on it," Marco said, and walked away straightening his vest with the energy of a man going into battle. She watched from the service station as James spoke to Marco. She couldn't hear what was said, but after about 30 seconds, Marco came back. "He says if you don't come over there yourself, he'll wait at that table until closing time," Marco reported. "Also, he pre-tipped me $200 and said that was for not asking questions. I have a lot of questions." "Don't." "Catherine, I know." She pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. "I know, just give me a second." She thought about the $43 she'd had when she left. She thought about the 6 weeks of saving tip money she'd done before finding this job. She thought about the midwife in Tallahassee and the couch at Dora's place, and the very specific plan she had built piece by careful piece to ensure that this exact situation never happened. She thought about the look on James's face when he saw her stomach, that unguarded half-second before he got himself under control. She walked back to table 12. Sit down, James said. I can't sit down. I'm working. You've been standing by the service station for 4 minutes. You're not currently working. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Not because he told her to, she was done doing things because James Varelli told her to, but because her feet hurt and she was 4.5 months pregnant and she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the 9-hour shift. How did you find me? She asked. Does it matter? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Your credit card. You used it once, 3 weeks after you left. A pharmacy in Fort Lauderdale. She remembered. She'd needed a prescription and she'd been $2 short of cash. She'd told herself it was fine, that one transaction wasn't enough for anyone to track. She'd apparently been wrong. That was 6 weeks ago, she said. You waited 6 weeks. I told you I was deciding on an approach. And this was the approach you landed on, showing up at my job? I sent you 11 messages. I changed my number. I know, I found the new one. A pause. You didn't respond to those either. That was intentional. He looked at her. Not with anger. That would have been easier to deal with. He looked at her the way he sometimes did in quiet moments, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, when the performance of being James Varelli fell away for a few seconds and left something much less certain behind. Is it mine? He asked. The question hit her somewhere in the chest, not because of what it implied. She understood why he had to ask it, logically she understood, but because of how quietly he said it. No accusation, no cold distance. Just a man asking a question he was genuinely afraid of the answer to. Yes, she said. He closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, then opened them. Okay, he said. Okay, she repeated. That's what you have to say? Okay. What would you like me to say? I don't know. Something. Something more than okay, James, because I have been... She stopped herself, lowered her voice. The table beside them was occupied by a family of 4, and she was not having this conversation publicly. I have been doing this alone for 4 months. Because you left. Because you lied to me. For 2 years. His jaw tightened. It was the only visible sign that the words landed. I kept things from you, he said. There's a difference. From where I'm sitting, there isn't. They looked at each other across the small table. 4.5 months of running, 2 years of working beside him, falling for him, believing she knew who he was. A baby that neither of them had planned, neither of them was ready for, and neither of them could pretend wasn't happening anymore. You look tired, James said quietly. Don't do that. It's not a criticism. I know what it is. It's you deciding I need to be taken care of and filing that away as a problem to solve. I'm not a problem, James. I'm a person who made a decision, and I'm dealing with the consequences of it, and I don't need... Catherine. His voice was low, not commanding, something else. I'm not here to argue. Then why are you here? He reached across the table and set something down between them. A small piece of paper folded once. She didn't pick it up immediately. What is that? The name and address of the best OB in Fort Lauderdale, he said. And my personal number, which you don't have anymore since you threw the other phone into a canal, which, by the way, is illegal in Florida. She stared at him. How do you know I threw it in a canal? Because I know you, and you weren't going to throw it in a trash can where someone could retrieve it. She looked at the paper. I'm not asking you to come back, James said. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you for anything tonight. I'm asking you to take that piece of paper and call that doctor because you're 4.5 months along and you're working 9-hour shifts on your feet and you deserve better prenatal care than whatever you currently have access to on a waitress salary. You don't know what I have access to. You're right. I don't. He said it without flinching. Tell me what you have access to. She said nothing. Catherine. Don't say my name like that. Like what? Like you're being patient with me. I hate it when you're patient with me. You're only patient when you've already decided what you want and you're waiting for everyone else to catch up. Something crossed his face that she might have called amusement, except she refused to find anything about this situation amusing. That's the most accurate thing anyone said about me in a long time. I know. She picked up the piece of paper, looked at it, put it in her apron pocket. I'm not calling that number tonight. That's fine. And I'm not coming back with you. I'm not asking you to. And I'm finishing my shift. I'll be here when you finish. She stood up. Her knees were unsteady in a way she was not going to acknowledge. You are going to order food and leave a reasonable tip and behave like a normal customer, she said. Define reasonable. 20%. Done. James. She stopped with her hand on the back of the chair. I mean it. You can't just show up here and think that... She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't know how to finish the sentence. This isn't over. I know, he said quietly. I'm not here because I think it's over. I'm here because I think it's just starting. She walked away. She did not turn around, but she heard him, very quietly, say one more thing to the empty chair across from him, or maybe to her retreating back, or maybe to himself. I should have told you, all of it, before any of this. She kept walking, pushed through the kitchen door, set her hands on the stainless steel counter. Elena looked up. Not sick? Not sick, Catherine said. Good. Elena slid a plate toward the pass. Henderson table needs their appetizers. Catherine took the plates. She went back out. She did her job. She passed table 12 4 more times over the next 2 hours and did not look at it directly, and James did not call her over again. He ate his dinner. He had the sea bass, which she knew because Marco reported it to her with the enthusiasm of someone who had too much information and no one to share it with. At 9:47, Marco came to find her. Table 12 just left, he said. She felt something she did not want to name. Okay. He left a 40% tip. Marco paused. And he left something else. On the table. She went to table 12. The table was already bussed, clean, ready for the next seating. On the center of the white tablecloth sat a small card. She picked it up. On one side was a phone number. On the other side, in James's handwriting, small, precise, never messy, were 4 words. I'll be outside. Whenever. She stood at table 12 for a long moment. Dinner service was winding down. The family of 4 had left. The anniversary couple was finishing their coffee. The restaurant was settling into the quieter rhythm of late evening when the energy drops and the staff starts moving toward the end of things. She put the card in her apron pocket, next to the doctor's address. She finished her shift. At 11:15, she walked out the side door of the Serafina restaurant into the warm Fort Lauderdale night. She was tired in a way that lived in her bones. Her back ached. She had $47 in tip money in her pocket. James was leaning against a black car parked at the end of the block. Not dramatically, not like someone who had planned the moment. Just a man leaning against a car, his jacket off now, his sleeves rolled up, looking at his phone like he'd been waiting for something he wasn't sure would actually show up. He looked up when she came out, straightened, didn't move toward her. She walked to within 10 feet of him and stopped. They stood there in the parking lot of a Fort Lauderdale restaurant at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, 4.5 months into a situation neither of them had seen coming. And Catherine looked at the man who had turned her world over twice and said the thing she had been building up to since the moment she walked to table 12. You should have told me. I know. Not just the business, the danger, the things you were protecting me from. You should have told me what it was and let me decide whether I could live with it. I know. You took that choice away from me. Yes. He said it plainly, no justification. I did. She looked at him. Why? Because I was afraid. A long pause. I was afraid you'd leave. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. James Varelli was afraid. I'm afraid of very specific things, he said. I'm not afraid of most of the things people expect me to be afraid of. But you. He stopped, started again. Losing you was specific. She folded her arms across her chest, which was increasingly complicated at this stage of pregnancy. And then I left anyway. Yes. How's that working out for you? It was not quite a question. He heard it anyway. Not great, he said. She looked at the card in her hand, then at him. I'm not getting in that car tonight. Okay. I need you to understand that nothing is resolved. Nothing is decided. You showing up here doesn't change what you did. I know it doesn't. I'm angry at you. I know. I have been angry at you for 4.5 months, and I have 17 other things to be angry at you about that I haven't even gotten to yet. I'll be here for all 17. She stared at him. Stop being reasonable. I'm not. You're being reasonable and calm and patient, and you know exactly what you're doing, James. You always know what you're doing. That's the problem. That's always been the problem. He took one step toward her, just one. What would you like me to do instead? The question hung between them, and Catherine, who had run 400 miles and changed her number and built a new life one careful piece at a time, looked at the man she had never quite been able to stop loving and said the thing she absolutely did not intend to say. Make me shut up. The words came out before she could catch them. She heard them leave her mouth. She watched his expression change. And James Varelli, feared, powerful, controlled James Varelli, who hadn't smiled with anything close to real warmth since the night she left, looked at her with something that was entirely new on his face. With pleasure, he said quietly. He didn't move. He didn't reach for her. He just stood there in the Fort Lauderdale night with his sleeves rolled up and the city behind him and said it like a promise, like the opening move in a game they had both already lost, like a man who had spent 4.5 months figuring out exactly what he wanted to say and had finally found his moment. And Catherine, damn her, felt something crack open in her chest that she had spent 4 months sealing shut. I hate you, she said. No, you don't. You don't get to tell me how I feel. You're right. He met her eyes. Do you hate me? She said nothing. He waited. He was good at waiting. He had always been impossibly good at waiting. Go home, James, she said finally. He reached into his jacket pocket and held out a card. A different one than the one he'd left at the table. My home address in Fort Lauderdale. I have a place here. I'm not going back to Miami tonight. She took the card. She didn't know why she took the card. Reflex, maybe. 4 months of being careful, and here she was taking the card. Good night, she said. Good night, Catherine. She walked to her car. She started the engine. She sat there for a moment, both cards in her hand. The doctor's address, his home address. And she looked in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, watching her drive away probably. Or not watching. She couldn't tell from here. She pulled out of the parking lot. She drove toward her apartment, toward the small, careful life she had built. Toward the couch that was technically hers, and the baby that was entirely hers, and the future she had been building one $47 tip shift at a time. She got home. She sat on the edge of her bed. She looked at the 2 cards in her hand. Then she picked up her phone, and after a very long time staring at the ceiling, she dialed the number on the doctor's card. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. It was 11:45 at night. She left a message anyway. Hi, she said. My name is Catherine Vale. I was given this number by... She stopped, started again. I'm 4.5 months pregnant and I need an appointment. Please call me back. She hung up. She put James's address on the nightstand. She told herself that didn't mean anything. She didn't believe herself for a single second. She called the doctor's office back the next morning at 8:03, 60 seconds after they opened. The receptionist's name was Brenda, and Brenda had the calm, unhurried energy of someone who had handled anxious pregnant women every single morning for 20 years. She gave Catherine an appointment for Thursday at 2. She asked for insurance information. Catherine gave her the name of the basic plan she'd gotten through the restaurant and hoped it would be enough. It wasn't enough. She already knew it wasn't enough. It covered the minimum, and the minimum was not what 4.5 months pregnant looked like when there were things to check and things to monitor and things that required equipment that cost more than a month of her rent. She sat with her phone in her hand after hanging up and looked at James's address on the nightstand. She picked it up, put it in her dresser drawer under a stack of folded shirts, closed the drawer, went to make breakfast. The eggs were fine. The coffee she wasn't supposed to have more than 1 cup of which felt like the cruelest restriction anyone had ever placed on her life. She stood at the kitchen window of her one-bedroom apartment and watched a man walk his dog past the building and felt the specific texture of being completely alone in the morning. Not lonely, exactly, just aware of every sound the apartment made that was not a person. Her phone rang. Unknown number, Fort Lauderdale area code. She almost didn't answer. Then she answered. "Good morning," James's voice, composed, as always. "Did you sleep? How did you get this number?" "You gave it to the doctor's office this morning. Brenda called my assistant to confirm the appointment." Catherine set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. "You have someone inside that office?" "I have someone who arranged for that office to prioritize you. It's not the same thing." "It is absolutely the same thing, James." "Catherine, no." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, sharp enough that it surprised even her. "No, you don't get to—" "I called that number because I thought it was a doctor, not because I thought it was another way for you to monitor me." A short pause. "I wasn't monitoring you. I set up the appointment to make sure you'd be seen quickly. And you had someone confirm the call. I wanted to know you'd actually gone through with it. So you were monitoring me." Another pause. This one longer. She heard him exhale through his nose, which was the closest James Varelli ever came to admitting defeat. "Yes," he said. "That was wrong. I'm sorry." The apology landed strangely. James did not apologize often. When he did, it was brief and meant, without ornamentation, and she'd learned a long time ago that for him, those two words cost something. She didn't soften. She wasn't ready to soften. "I'm going to the appointment Thursday," she said. "Alone." "Okay. And I need you to stop having people report back to you about my movements. Okay? I mean it." "I know you mean it." She pressed her fingers to her forehead. "Why are you being agreeable?" "Because you're right. You're never this agreeable." "I'm trying something new," he said, and the faintest edge of dry humor was there, just barely. "It's uncomfortable." She almost smiled. She didn't let herself. "I have to go to work. It's 7:40 in the morning. I have a double shift." He was quiet for a moment. "Catherine, you're 5 months pregnant." 4.5? "You're working double shifts at 4.5 months pregnant. People do it. You don't have to." And there it was. The offer she'd been expecting and dreading in equal measure, because the offer was never just the offer. The offer came with strings she could see and strings she couldn't, and the ones she couldn't see were the ones that had gotten her here. "I'm going to work," she said. "Don't call me from unknown numbers." She hung up. She was 20 minutes into her shift when she realized she'd forgotten to eat the eggs. Bolt. Thursday came with the particular gray humidity of a Florida morning that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to storm. Catherine drove herself to the appointment and sat in the waiting room of Dr. Anita Reyes' office, surrounded by magazines she didn't read and a fish tank she stared at for 12 minutes while her name worked its way up the list. Dr. Reyes was in her late 40s, efficient without being cold, with the kind of directness Catherine responded to. She asked the standard questions. Catherine answered them. They did the ultrasound. That was when things got quiet in a different way. Dr. Reyes moved the probe with careful, practiced hands, and Catherine lay there looking at the ceiling and then couldn't stop herself from looking at the screen. And on the screen was a small, undeniable, completely real person curled in the specific position of someone who had claimed a space and intended to stay in it. "Heart rate is good," Dr. Reyes said. "Position looks fine. Baby's measuring right on track." A pause. "Do you want to know the sex?" Catherine stopped. She'd told herself she didn't need to know yet. She'd told herself she'd wait until the next appointment, or the one after that, until she had someone to find out with. She told herself a lot of things. "Yes." "Girl," Dr. Reyes said simply. Catherine looked at the screen. A girl. She felt something shift in her chest. Not cracking this time, not breaking, but rearranging, like something that had been off balance for months had just found the position it was supposed to be in. "Is she—" Her voice came out wrong. She cleared her throat. "Is she okay?" Everything looks healthy, Dr. Reyes said. She's doing exactly what she should be doing. A careful pause. You, on the other hand, your blood pressure's slightly elevated, not alarming, but worth watching. Are you under a significant amount of stress? Catherine stared at the ceiling. Define significant. Dr. Reyes made a note. I'd like to see you back in 2 weeks instead of 4. And I want you to seriously consider reducing your work hours. Double shifts are, I know. I'm not saying stop working. I'm saying your body is doing a significant amount of work already. Catherine sat up slowly. Looked at the printout Dr. Reyes was already preparing. A grainy, impossible, black and white image of a girl who didn't have a name yet. She took the printout. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 8 minutes. Then she took a photo of it and sent it to the one number she'd told herself she wasn't going to contact. No message, just the photo. His response came in 40 seconds flat. Can I call you? She stared at it, typed, not right now, then deleted it. Typed, give me an hour, deleted that too. She typed, she's healthy, sent it. Put her phone face down on the passenger seat and drove back to work. He showed up at the restaurant again that night. She saw him before he saw her this time, or maybe she only thought she did. Maybe he'd already known exactly where she was standing and was simply choosing not to look yet. He was at the host station again, same unhurried posture, and this time he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, 50s, silver-haired, wearing a cream blazer, and looking around the restaurant with the eyes of someone who assessed spaces the way other people assess faces. Catherine recognized her. Miriam Virelli, James's aunt. The woman who had run the Virelli household accounts for 15 years and who had once looked at Catherine across a conference table and said, with perfect pleasantness, "You're very capable, Miss Vale. James is lucky to have you." The compliment had landed like a warning. Catherine turned and walked to the kitchen before either of them saw her, or before James pretended he hadn't already seen her. Marco found her 2 minutes later. "Your friend is back, with a woman who looks like she eats lawyers for breakfast." "She does," Catherine said. "Don't let them get table 12. They requested table 12. "Of course they did. Put them at 9. The manager already confirmed 12. She closed her eyes briefly. "Fine. Do you want me to take it again?" "No." She straightened. "No, I've got it." She walked to table 12 with the particular energy of a person who had decided that the best way through something terrible was to move fast enough that fear couldn't keep up. "Good evening," she said. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Miriam Virelli looked at her with an expression of polished neutrality that had probably taken decades to perfect. "Catherine, you look well." "Thank you. We have a nice Sancerre this evening if you—" "Sit down, please," Miriam said. "I'm working." "James told me you said that last time, too." Miriam's voice was not unkind. It was precise, the way a scalpel is precise. "I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here because my nephew asked me to come, and I generally don't refuse James when he asks me for something, which is a habit I've had since he was 8 years old, and it has gotten me into more complicated situations than I care to count." James, Catherine noticed, was watching the exchange without speaking, which meant he'd planned it this way. Miriam first, him second, structured like a meeting with a difficult client. She pulled out the chair, sat down. 5 minutes. "That's all I need." Miriam folded her hands on the table. "James wants to establish paternity legally. He wants to be on the birth certificate. He wants to set up a financial account for the child before she's born." A pause. "He wanted me to tell you these things rather than tell you himself because he thought you'd be more likely to hear them from someone who isn't emotionally compromised." Catherine looked at James. "Are you emotionally compromised?" "Apparently," he said. "That's new." "Many things are new," he said quietly. She turned back to Miriam. "What does he want in exchange?" Miriam's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough to show something like respect. "Nothing, no conditions. He wants to establish legal responsibility. That's different from wanting control." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, a legal document sounds exactly like control." "From where you're sitting," Miriam said carefully, "you are carrying a child alone in a city where you have no family, working double shifts on an elevated blood pressure, and sleeping, I'd guess, about 5 hours a night. Legal recognition of paternity doesn't limit your rights. It creates obligations for him. Those are different things. The table was quiet. Catherine looked at the woman across from her, at the sharp intelligence in her eyes, at the thing beneath the precision that might, if she squinted, look like genuine concern. "Did he put you up to the concern too?" Catherine said. "Or is that yours?" Miriam almost smiled. It didn't reach her mouth, but it was there around her eyes. "I've been worried about this child since James called me from the parking lot of this restaurant 3 nights ago. That is entirely mine." James said nothing. He was watching Catherine in the way he always watched important things, completely still, waiting for information. "I'll think about it," Catherine said. "That's all I'm asking," Miriam said. Catherine stood up. "I'll send Marco over for your drink orders." She looked at James one more time. "Birth certificate is one thing. The rest we talk about on my terms. On my timeline. Not yours." "Agreed," James said. "I mean it. I know you mean it." He met her eyes. "I'm learning to believe you when you say things." She walked away from the table with her jaw set and her hands not quite steady, and the printout of the ultrasound folded in her apron pocket where she'd put it that morning and hadn't taken out because she didn't entirely know why she was keeping it close. At 10:30, she was refilling the salt shakers at the service station when Marco came to lean beside her with the look of a man who had been carrying information for too long. "The woman left," he said. "The man stayed." "I know. He's been on his phone for the last hour, and he hasn't ordered dessert. He doesn't eat dessert." "How do you—" Marco stopped. "Right, so you know him." "Marco. I'm not asking, I'm observing." He picked up a salt shaker, put it down. "He told me when I brought his water that if anyone bothered you tonight, I should let him know." Catherine's hand stilled on the shaker. "He said that. He said it like it was a reasonable thing to say, like asking the waiter to monitor for problems was standard dinner etiquette. It is, for him. Is it a problem that someone would bother you?" She thought about that. She thought about the last 4 months, about the 2 times she'd been followed home by a customer who thought her smile meant something it didn't, about the night 3 weeks ago when someone had tried the side door of her apartment building at 2 in the morning and she'd lain awake in the dark with her hand over her stomach until it stopped. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Okay." Marco set down the salt shaker. "He also tipped me again. This one was $300. Marco. I have rent due." "I know. I don't care. Stop accepting money from him." "He doesn't give me a choice. He just puts it on the table." She looked toward table 12. James was on his phone, face angled down, not looking at her. He looked, in this moment, like a man handling something difficult, something that required the specific kind of attention he applied to problems he was not willing to lose. She didn't know if she was the problem or the solution or something he hadn't categorized yet. At 11, when she clocked out, he was still there. She considered going out the back. She considered calling Marco and asking him to say she'd already left. She considered a lot of things, standing in the kitchen with her jacket over her arm and her feet sending very specific complaints up through both legs. She went out the front. "You stayed," she said, stopping at table 12. "You knew I would. I was hoping you'd surprise me." He put his phone away, looked up at her. There were lines around his eyes that she didn't remember from before, small new ones at the corners, and she wondered if he was sleeping and decided not to ask because that was not a question she was ready to care about the answer to. "Walk with me," he said. "James, not to the car, just outside. 10 minutes. She stood there, her feet hurt. She had the ultrasound printout in her pocket. Dr. Reyes had said blood pressure, stress, double shifts. Miriam had said obligations, not control. She didn't know what James was saying yet exactly. He was saying 10 minutes, that was all. 10 minutes, she said. They walked out together into the Fort Lauderdale night, which was still warm at 11 o'clock the way Fort Lauderdale nights insisted on being, carrying humidity like a second skin. They walked along the block in front of the restaurant without any particular direction, not close enough to touch, not far enough to look like strangers. "Miriam told me what she said," James started. "Good. Then you know my answer. I know your answer about the birth certificate. The rest is the same answer. I'll think about it. On my timeline. Okay. A pause. Can I tell you something that isn't about the legal stuff? She looked at him sideways. You're going to anyway. I've been trying not to. He said it simply. I've been trying to handle this the way you want me to handle it. Methodically, practically, giving you space to process. But I've been losing my mind for 4.5 months, Catherine, and at some point I need to say the unreasonable thing. She stopped walking. He stopped too, half a step later. Say it, she said. He turned to face her. I didn't know what I had until you left. And I know that's the most obvious, useless thing a person can say. I know it sounds like every bad movie about a man who only values something when it's gone. I'm aware of how little it means without evidence. But I need you to know that I wasn't keeping things from you because I thought you couldn't handle it. I was keeping things from you because if you knew everything and you still chose to stay, that meant you were choosing something dangerous, and I couldn't ask you to choose that. She stared at him. So you made the choice for me. Yes, because you knew better. Because I was scared, he said. The word sat between them with its whole uncomfortable weight. Every decision I've made that I regret comes down to the same thing. I was afraid of what the honest version of my life would cost me. The street around them was quiet. A car passed. Somewhere a block over, a bar was releasing its midnight crowd. Catherine felt the baby move. It was small, a flutter, the kind of thing that still surprised her every time because she hadn't learned yet how to not be surprised by it. She pressed her hand to her side without thinking. James saw it. His eyes went to her hand. His expression did the thing it had done in the restaurant on that first night. Slipped, briefly, into something unguarded. Does she... He stopped. Started again. Does she move a lot? More lately, Catherine said. Her voice came out softer than she intended. She didn't pull her hand away. The doctor said it's normal. Can I... He cut himself off, looked at her. No, never mind. You were going to ask if you could feel it, and then I decided not to ask. Why? Because you said everything on your terms. She stood there in the Fort Lauderdale night with his unguarded face in front of her and her hand on her stomach and the specific terrible clarity of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and had spent 4 months telling herself she didn't. She took his hand. She placed it on her side where she'd felt the flutter. James went completely still. They stood like that for 30 seconds, maybe 40, while the city moved around them and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that could be said in words without ruining it. Then Catherine took his hand away, stepped back. Don't read into that, she said. Her voice was not steady. I'm not. I mean it. I know you mean it. She picked up her jacket from where she'd dropped it over her arm. Good night, James. He let her go. She made it half a block before her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Not James's number, not any number she recognized. We need to talk about what James Varelli is hiding from you. All of it. Not the version he's decided to tell. She stopped walking, looked at the message, read it twice. Her thumbs hovered over the screen. She typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, someone who knows what happened to the last woman who trusted him. The street felt different. The warmth felt different. She stood under a streetlight and read those words and felt something change in the air around her. Not the temperature, not the sound, but something beneath all of it, the kind of shift you feel in your chest before you understand it with your brain. She did not turn around to look for James. She did not call him. She walked to her car, locked the doors, sat in the dark, and stared at those words until they stopped making sense from reading them too many times. The last woman who trusted him. She thought about 2 years. 2 years of thinking she knew him, the real him, the one beneath the legend, the one who ordered sea bass and said her name quietly and had never once, not once, raised a hand or his voice in anger at her. She thought about the version of James she'd built in her head, and the version the world knew, and the distance between those two things that she had always chosen to believe was smaller than it looked. She thought about her daughter, the flutter, the black and white printout. She started the engine. She drove home. She did not sleep. At 3 in the morning, she sat at her kitchen table with the ultrasound printout in front of her and her phone in her hand and the unknown numbers message still on her screen. And she made the decision she had been avoiding since the moment she turned around in the Serafina dining room and found James Varelli watching her from across the room. She could not do this halfway. She could not stay in Fort Lauderdale carrying his child, working double shifts, letting him sit at table 12 and walk her to her car and place his hand on her stomach. She could not do all of that and also protect herself. She had to either walk away completely, far enough that he couldn't follow, or she had to walk toward it, toward him, toward the truth, toward whatever that message was pointing at. She stared at her phone. She typed a text to James. I need to know everything. Not the version you've decided I can handle. Everything. If you want any part of what's happening between us, that's the starting price. She sent it before she could think better of it. His response came in under a minute, at 3:17 in the morning, which meant he was awake, which meant he wasn't sleeping either. When? She looked at the ultrasound, at the tiny curled shape of her daughter, who had no name yet, who had claimed her space and intended to stay. She typed, tomorrow, your place, 8 a.m. And James, if I find out you've hidden anything else, I walk, for good, with her. 3 dots. A long pause. Then, I'll have coffee ready. She put her phone down. She looked at the unknown message one more time. The last woman who trusted him. She saved the number. Didn't respond to it. Closed the message. She was either walking into the most important conversation of her life tomorrow morning, or she was walking into a carefully constructed room with no exits. She did not know which one it was. She went to bed. She lay in the dark with her hand on her stomach and her eyes open and the fan turning overhead and the particular silence of a life balanced at the edge of a decision that could not be undone. The flutter came again, small and certain, at 3:44 in the morning. She pressed her hand flat against it and felt the most profound, frightening, absolute thing she had ever felt, that she was not, and could not be, neutral about any of this anymore. Whatever happened tomorrow, she was already in it. She had been in it since the moment she took his hand and placed it against her side in the Fort Lauderdale night, and told herself not to read into it, and felt, even as she said the words, that she was lying to herself completely. She almost didn't go. At 7:45 in the morning, she was standing in front of her bathroom mirror with her toothbrush in her hand and the very clear, very rational thought that she could simply not show up. She could text James some version of, I changed my mind and go to work, and let the whole thing settle back into the careful distance she'd spent 4 months building. She could do that. It was still an option. She rinsed, spat, looked at herself. The woman in the mirror looked like someone who had not slept and had made a decision at 3 in the morning that she didn't entirely trust in the daylight. She looked like someone who was 5 months pregnant and running on bad coffee and stubbornness. She looked, Catherine thought, like someone who was going anyway. She went anyway. James's Fort Lauderdale address turned out to be a building 12 blocks from the restaurant. Not a hotel, not a rental, a building with a doorman and a parking structure and the specific quiet of money that didn't need to announce itself. The doorman knew her name before she said it. He called her Miss Vale and directed her to the elevator with the practiced warmth of someone who'd been briefed. She rode up to the 14th floor and stood in front of the door numbered 1407 for approximately 10 seconds before knocking. James opened it himself. No assistant, no security visible, just him in dark pants and a gray shirt with the sleeves already rolled up, holding a coffee mug and looking like he'd been awake since before she had. You came, he said. I said I would. You also said a lot of things at 3 in the morning that people sometimes walk back. I don't walk things back, she said, and stepped past him into the apartment. It was large and mostly empty of personality. The kind of place furnished by someone who understood quality but hadn't yet decided to make it a home. Clean lines, good light, expensive things placed without attachment. One wall was entirely windows overlooking the water, and the morning was doing something extraordinary with the light outside, all silver and low gold, the kind of morning that felt unfair in its beauty, relative to the situation inside. She sat at the kitchen table. He poured her a coffee. Decaf, she noticed, which meant he'd paid attention or he'd been briefed, and she wasn't sure which one was more unsettling. Everything, she said before he could sit down. That's what I asked for. I know. He sat, set his mug down. looked at her with the expression of a man who had been preparing for something and was still not entirely prepared. Where do you want me to start? Start with what you kept from me. While I was your secretary, while I was in that office, handling your accounts, booking your travel, sitting across from men I didn't understand and smiling because you asked me to smile. His jaw moved. The business accounts you managed were legitimate, all of them. I kept those completely separated. I know they were legitimate. I audited them personally. I'm asking about everything that wasn't in those files. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the Varelli family has operated outside the law for 3 generations. My grandfather built the foundation. My father expanded it. I inherited it at 26 when my father had his first stroke and there was no one else. A pause. I didn't choose it. I want to be clear about that. Not that it makes it better. What does outside the law mean specifically? Extortion, some distribution. Territory enforcement. He said the words plainly, without decorating them. And loan operations that were not conducted through banks. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. Were you ever directly involved in violence? The pause before his answer was the longest pause in the conversation so far. I've given orders, he said, that protected family members and business interests. I have not personally. He stopped. The distinction doesn't hold up, I know. No, she said. It doesn't. She breathed through her nose. Is any of that ongoing? I've been moving things toward legitimate channels for 2 years, since before you left, actually. It's slow. These things don't... You can't just close a door and walk out. People depend on the structure. There are obligations that have to be managed. Are you still in danger? He looked at her steadily. There are people who would prefer the transition not happen. Yes. She set the mug down. Are we in danger? Me and her. That is exactly what I have been trying to prevent since the night I walked into that restaurant, he said, and the composure in his voice cracked just slightly, just at the edges. That is why I waited 6 weeks before coming. That is why I set up the doctor, the security in this building, everything I have done since finding you has been about reducing that exposure. You should have told me that, she said, instead of just doing it. I know. I would have... She stopped, looked at the table, looked up. I don't know what I would have done, but it was my choice to make. Yes, he said. It was. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, a boat moved across the water, slow and white against the silver morning. Last night, she said, someone texted me. Unknown number. They said they knew what you were hiding, and they mentioned... She pulled out her phone, slid it across the table. They mentioned the last woman who trusted you. James looked at the message. His face did not change in the way faces change when something is surprising. It changed in the way faces change when something feared has finally arrived. Do you know what that means? Catherine said. It wasn't a question. He slid the phone back to her. He stood up, walked to the window and stood there with his back to her for long enough that she started to say his name. Her name was Sophia Reyes, he said, without turning around. She was not. We weren't together. She worked for a partner of my father's. 2 years before you started working for me, she approached me with information about my father's partner, said she had evidence of things that would benefit me to know. He turned around. His face was controlled in the specific way that meant the thing underneath it was not controlled at all. I trusted the information. I acted on it. It turned out she was sent deliberately to test my loyalty to the partnership. She was caught. He stopped. She was hurt badly. I don't know the current situation. I lost track of her 3 years ago. Catherine felt the floor do the same thing it had done that first night in the restaurant. They hurt her because of something you did. Because of information I acted on, yes. And you didn't go after them for it. I was 28, and I had just inherited a structure I didn't fully control, and the people who hurt her were people my entire family's operation depended on. He said it flatly, without asking for understanding. I made a choice to absorb it and maintain stability. That is the choice I regret most, more than any other choice I've made. She stared at him. The person who sent you that message, he said carefully, knows something specific about that situation. That is not common knowledge. The number of people who know the details of what happened to Sophia is small. How small? 4 people, including me. One of them is Miriam. Are you saying Miriam? No. His voice was certain. Not Miriam. Then who? He crossed the room back to the table, sat down, looked at her in the way he looked at things he was not ready to say. James. Her voice was low. Who sent me that message? I think, he said slowly, that it was sent by the man who has the most to gain from you not trusting me. Which man? His name is Daniel Corso. He was my father's primary partner. He runs the portions of the operation I have been most aggressively moving away from. He has known about you since before you left. He has known about the pregnancy for approximately 3 months. The temperature in the room didn't change. Catherine felt cold anyway. He's known for 3 months, she said. Yes. And you knew he knew. A pause. I suspected. She stood up, the chair scraped back hard against the floor. You suspected that a dangerous man knew I existed and knew about our daughter, and you didn't think that was something you needed to tell me at 3 a.m. when you were texting me back about coffee? I was managing... Don't. Her voice came out like a door slamming. Do not say managing to me right now. Catherine. No, James. I asked you for everything. I said that was the starting price. And you sat there and told me about your grandfather and your father and the legitimate accounts and the transition. And you left out the part where there is a specific man who knows my name and my address and that I'm carrying your child and who sent me a threatening text last night. And you knew... Her voice broke on the word, and she hated it, hated the break, pushed through it. You knew and you still didn't tell me. I told you more tonight than I have told anyone in 10 years, he said, and his voice was not steady either. I am trying, Catherine. I know that doesn't... It doesn't matter how much you told me if you still decided which parts I got to know. She pressed her hands flat on the table between them. That is the same thing you've always done, deciding what I can handle, managing my information, keeping me exactly as informed as you think I should be. She was breathing hard now, and she knew it, and she couldn't make herself slow it down. I am not a situation to be managed. I am the mother of your daughter, and there is a man out there who thinks he can use me against you, and I have been walking around this city for 3 months with no idea. You weren't in immediate danger. How do you know that? She pushed off the table. How do you know I wasn't? Were you having me followed? Was there someone watching my apartment? Because that's the only way you'd know I wasn't in immediate danger, James. So which is it? Were you monitoring me, or were you just assuming? The silence was total. Both, he said. She laughed. It came out wrong, too sharp, too short, not a real laugh at all. Both, right. There have been 2 people outside your building every night since I found you, he said, rotating. You never saw them because they were not meant to be seen. They were there because Corso made an inquiry about your address 6 weeks ago, and I was not going to leave you unprotected while I figured out his intentions. She stood in the middle of his Fort Lauderdale kitchen with the morning light coming through the windows and the weight of what he'd just said sitting on her chest like something physical. You had people outside my apartment, she said, for 6 weeks, without telling me. Yes. While I lay awake thinking I was alone. You were never alone. That is not... She stopped, started again. That is not the same as not being alone, James. That is you deciding again that your version of keeping me safe matters more than my right to know what is happening in my own life. She picked up her purse from the back of the chair. I need to leave. Catherine, I can't be here right now. Please don't. He stood. For the first time since she'd known him, the word please came out of him without any structure around it. Just the word, raw, without anything holding it up. Please don't walk out of this apartment without letting me finish. I know you have every reason to leave. I know I have done exactly the thing you asked me not to do. I know that. I'm asking you to stay for 10 more minutes because what I have to tell you next is the part you actually need to know. She stopped at the kitchen doorway. Her hand was on the frame. She stood there with her back to him and her jaw locked, and the baby doing something that wasn't a flutter this time, something more deliberate, a movement she'd started to recognize as her daughter's particular way of making herself known. 10 minutes, Catherine said, without turning around. She heard him exhale. She went back to the table, did not sit. stood with her arms crossed and her eyes on him. Corso is moving, James said. He was on his feet now too, not pacing, just standing, like sitting felt wrong for what he was about to say. He has been consolidating operations that I've been pulling resources from. He's losing money because of the transition, and he's been losing influence because certain people who previously reported to him now report to me. He needs leverage to stop the transition or reverse it. And I'm the leverage. You and our daughter, yes. She absorbed this. What does leverage mean, specifically? It means he would use the threat of harm to you to force me to reverse the business decisions I've made, sign assets back over, reestablish the agreements I've terminated. A pause. He would not necessarily act on the threat. The threat itself is usually sufficient. Usually. Usually. She looked at him. And if it's not sufficient? If you don't reverse the decisions? He held her gaze. Then the threat becomes action. The room was very quiet. What kind of action? She said, and her voice was completely flat now. All the anger burned down to something colder and more precise. The kind he's used before, James said, against people connected to people who don't cooperate. Sophia, she said, among others. She sat down. Not because she wanted to. Her body made the decision without asking her, her legs deciding they were done holding her up through this particular conversation. How long? She said. How long do we have before he stops making threats and starts acting? I don't know. That's the honest answer. The inquiry about your address was 6 weeks ago. The text last night is new. It suggests he's escalating, trying to make you distrust me, trying to isolate you from the one person who has resources to protect you. James came around the table and crouched in front of her, which she had never once seen him do. James Varelli, crouching to be at someone else's eye level, and the wrongness of it, the sheer departure from everything she knew him to be, made her chest do something complicated. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to understand that every decision I made, right or wrong, was made because I was trying to keep you alive and keep our daughter safe before she even gets here. She looked at him from a foot away. She looked at the lines around his eyes that were new, at the thing in his face that was not composure anymore, was not the controlled performance of a powerful man who had everything managed. He looked, up close, like someone who had been losing sleep over something that mattered more than anything he'd faced before, and didn't know how to say that without sounding like an excuse. You lied, she said quietly. Yes. You monitored me without consent. Yes. You knew there was a specific threat to my safety, and you managed it without telling me. Yes. And you still think that was protecting me. I think I was wrong about what protecting you means, he said. I'm learning the difference. I am learning it too slowly, and I know that. But I am learning it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then her phone rang. Unknown number, different from last night's, Fort Lauderdale area code. She answered it without thinking because her hand moved before her brain caught up. Miss Vale. The voice was male, unhurried, with an accent she couldn't immediately place. Slight, cultivated, the kind that suggested someone who had worked to remove a regional origin. I apologize for the early hour. My name is not important. What is important is that you are currently sitting in James Varelli's apartment, which means he's in the process of telling you his version of events. I'd like to offer you mine. Catherine did not move. She did not look at James. She kept her eyes on the middle distance and kept her voice completely level. What do you want? Clarity, the voice said. I want you to have a clear picture of the man you're considering trusting. James has told you about Sophia Reyes, I assume. He's given you the version where he's a young man in an impossible situation who made a tragic choice. What he hasn't told you is what he did after. James was watching her face. She felt him reading it. She did not give him anything to read. What did he do after? She said. He negotiated, the voice said, very successfully. He secured the partnership, secured the assets, secured his own position. And in exchange, he agreed to let Sophia's situation resolve without intervention. She's been in a care facility in Hialeah for 3 years, Miss Vale. Complete neurological damage from a head injury. She is 29 years old and she will not recover. And James Varelli paid for the facility, which is the closest he has come to acknowledging that his negotiation is the reason she's there. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Catherine could hear the boat outside on the water. She could hear her own heartbeat. She could hear James breathing 3 feet away, watching her hold the phone. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you deserve to know who you're dealing with," the voice said pleasantly. "And because I want you to leave that apartment today and go somewhere safe. Somewhere that isn't in James Varelli's orbit. I can arrange that if you'd like. I have resources. I can have you in a comfortable, secure location within the hour, with full prenatal care, everything you need, and James will have no access." "You're offering to protect me," she said. "From him." "I'm offering you options," the voice said. "That's all. You've had very few options recently. I'd like to change that." "And what would you want in exchange?" A brief pause. A small, satisfied sound. "Nothing you aren't already in a position to provide. A conversation. Some information about the transition James is managing. Nothing harmful, nothing dangerous." Catherine felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She looked at James. For the first time since she'd answered the phone, she looked directly at him. His face told her he already knew who was on the phone. It told her he was holding himself very still with the controlled tension of a man who wanted desperately to take the phone from her hand and could not. "I'll think about it," she said into the phone. "Don't call this number again." She hung up. She set the phone on the table face up. The silence in the kitchen lasted 4 full seconds. "That was Corso," James said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "What did he offer you?" "Protection, somewhere safe." She looked at him. "In exchange for information about your transition." James was very still. "He wants you to spy on me. He wants me to provide information." He framed it more gently than that. She pushed the phone toward the center of the table. "Sophia is in a care facility in Hialeah." James said nothing. "Neurological damage," she said. "She's 29. "Catherine, you paid for the facility." "Yes. That's how you manage your guilt." It came out without heat, which was worse than anger, flat, factual. You put money at the problem and call it resolution. "There's no resolution for what happened to Sophia," he said quietly. "The facility is the only thing I could do. I know how insufficient that is." "You negotiated your position while she was being hurt." "I did." She sat with that, turned it over, felt the full weight of it. "Is what he said true?" she said. "All of it." "The facts are accurate," James said. "The framing is designed to make you walk out of here and into his hands." "The facts are enough," she said. "I don't need his framing to be disturbed by the facts." "I know." She pressed her hands flat on her thighs and looked at the table and breathed. In through the nose, out slow, the way Dr. Reyes had told her to manage stress, the way that felt both helpful and completely inadequate to the present moment. "He's going to call again," she said. "Yes. And if I don't take what he's offering, he's going to do something else." "Yes. And if I do take it..." She stopped. "He doesn't actually want to protect me. He wants to use me against you. And then I become Sophia. Or some version of Sophia." "Yes." James said it like it cost him something. "That is exactly what would happen." She looked up. "So I'm trapped?" "No." His voice was firm. "You are not trapped. There are options. They are not the options you had 2 days ago, but what are the options, James?" She was done with framing and caveats. "What are the actual options?" "You come here, to this building, which is secure and which Corso cannot reach without significant difficulty. You stop working at the restaurant. You let me manage the threat while I accelerate the transition." "Accelerate how?" "I have a meeting scheduled in 2 weeks with federal prosecutors." He said it with the particular steadiness of someone saying a sentence they've said to themselves many times before testing it aloud. "I have been in preliminary discussions for 4 months. I have documentation that would allow me to formalize the transition and receive protection for the family name in exchange for cooperation on several ongoing federal investigations." The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than any that had come before. "You're going to cooperate with federal prosecutors," she said slowly. "I am going to cooperate with federal prosecutors. he confirmed. It will end Corso's operation. It will end the criminal aspects of everything connected to my family's name. It will also expose me to significant legal risk, which my attorneys are currently managing. She stared at him. You're going to testify? Against Corso and 3 others, yes. And you've been doing this for 4 months? Since approximately the week after you left, he said. Not because you left, because you leaving made it clear that I was never going to be able to offer you or our daughter anything worth having if I didn't clean the foundation first. She felt everything she had prepared for this morning. The anger, the clarity, the walls, shift and rearrange in a way that left her completely uncertain of her footing. Why didn't you tell me, she said, when you came to the restaurant? Why didn't you say this first? Because it's not a strategy to win you back, he said. It's a decision I made for reasons that have nothing to do with winning anything. I didn't want you to think... He paused. I didn't want you to think I was doing it as a gesture. I wanted to be further along before I told you. I wanted it to be real before it became a conversation. She looked at him for a long time. The morning outside had fully arrived. The silver was gone, replaced by the clear, hard light of a Florida day that had made its decision. I need you to understand something, she said finally. If I stay here, if I let you, if I agree to any of this, it is not because I trust you. It is not because I've forgiven anything. It is because there is a man on the other end of an unknown phone number who just offered to use me and my daughter as leverage against you. And between 2 bad options, I am choosing the one where I am physically present when things go wrong, rather than the one where I am somewhere else not knowing what is happening. I understand, James said. I make the decisions about my care, my doctor, my schedule. Yes. You tell me everything from this point, not the version you've curated. Everything. Yes. And if I find out you've kept anything else, I know, he said quietly. You walk. With her. She picked up her phone, looked at the unknown number from this morning, Corso's number. She held the phone out to James. Give this to whoever handles that problem. And then explain to me exactly what I'm walking into with these prosecutors and how long until our daughter is born into a world where her father isn't actively the target of a criminal who already destroyed one woman's life. James took the phone. He looked at her, not with relief, not with the satisfaction of someone who had won something. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who understood, finally and completely, that what she had just offered was not trust and was not forgiveness and was not surrender. It was a woman with no remaining neutral ground deciding to face something rather than run from it, and extending the absolute minimum of cooperation required to survive. It was the most frightening thing he had ever been offered. He took it. I'll make some calls, he said. You do that, Catherine said. I'm going to take a shower and eat something because I haven't eaten since yesterday and my blood pressure is apparently a concern. She walked toward the hallway, stopped at the doorway. James? She didn't turn around. The facility. Sophia's facility. A breath. Make sure it's the best one, whatever she needs, whatever that costs. You don't get to call that resolved, but you don't get to let it stay as it is either. She walked down the hall. Behind her, she heard him pick up his phone. She heard him dial. She stood in the hallway of a stranger's apartment that was about to become her temporary life, with her hand on her stomach and the hard morning light coming through the window at the end of the hall. And she understood, with the cold clarity of someone who has just stepped off solid ground, that she had committed herself to something she could not uncommit from. There was no version of the next few months where she was safe and separate and in control. There was only through. The first 3 days inside the apartment on the 14th floor were the longest days of Catherine's life. And she had spent 4 months alone in a city that didn't know her name. She set up in the second bedroom. James did not suggest otherwise. There was a bed already there, a decent one, and she made Marco bring her things from the apartment in 2 trips. Her clothes, her art supplies she hadn't touched since leaving Miami, the small collection of secondhand paperbacks she'd accumulated over 4 months. Marco asked exactly one question during the second trip, standing in the bedroom doorway with a box of her books under his arm. Are you okay? I'm making a decision, she said. Is it a good one? I have absolutely no idea. He put the books down, squeezed her shoulder once, brief and solid, the way people do when they don't have words that fit the situation. Then he left, and she was inside James Varelli's Fort Lauderdale apartment with her secondhand paperbacks and her blood pressure instructions and the particular weight of a situation she had chosen with her eyes open. James was careful those first 3 days, almost excessively careful. He gave her space in the kitchen in the mornings, which turned out to mean he made coffee and left it, and went to work in the room he'd converted into an office at the other end of the apartment, and they moved around each other like two people who had agreed on the terms of a ceasefire without quite believing it would hold. She appreciated it. She also hated it, because the consideration felt strategic, and she couldn't be sure it wasn't. On the evening of the third day, she knocked on his office door. He opened it. He'd been on a call. She could see the laptop open, multiple documents on the screen, the particular organized chaos of someone managing something complicated. The federal meeting, she said. When exactly? 9 days. Who knows about it? My attorney, Miriam. Now you. A pause. That's the complete list. Corso doesn't know. No. How sure are you? As sure as I can be. We've used no electronic communication about it. All meetings have been in person, different locations each time. My attorney has taken substantial precautions. She leaned against the doorframe. What happens to us legally, if you cooperate? That depends on the scope of what I provide. Best case, I receive formal immunity on several counts in exchange for testimony. The business assets transition under a compliance agreement, and the Varelli name is attached to a legitimate holding company within 18 months. And worst case, he met her eyes. I do some time. Managed. With full cooperation, the prosecutors are not looking for maximum exposure on me. I'm not the target. Corso is the target. Sometime, she repeated. Define some. 12 to 18 months, potentially. With good behavior and full cooperation, possibly less. She absorbed this, looked at the floor, looked back up. You're telling me there's a real possibility our daughter is born while you're in federal custody? Yes, he said. That is a real possibility. The honesty of it hit differently than she expected. Not better, not worse. Just different. Just real. Okay, she said. Okay? I'm processing it. She straightened. Is there food? I've been staring at work in the bedroom for 3 hours and I forgot to eat lunch. He blinked. The shift in register seemed to catch him off guard. There's pasta. I had things brought in. Good. She walked past him toward the kitchen. Tell me about Corso's operation while I eat. All of it. I want to understand what we're actually dealing with. She heard him close the laptop. He came to the kitchen. He sat across from her while she ate, and he talked, methodically, without softening the details, about Daniel Corso and the 3-county operation he'd run under the Varelli partnership for 11 years. He talked for 40 minutes. She asked 12 questions, all of them specific. He answered all 12 without deflecting. When she finished eating, she sat back and looked at him. He's going to find out about the prosecutors, she said. Probably before the meeting, yes. These things leak. And when he does? He'll move faster than he's been moving. James folded his hands on the table. Which is why I want to move the meeting earlier. How much earlier? I've been on the phone with my attorney today. We're trying for 5 days from now. She set her fork down. 5 days. Yes. And in 5 days you either have federal protection or you don't. Essentially. She looked at the table, at the half-empty bowl, at her own hands. I want to be in that meeting, she said. Catherine, not in the room. I want to be in the building. I want to be able to hear what happens, or at least know the minute it happens. She looked up. I am not sitting in this apartment for 5 days while you go do the most important thing that's happened in this entire situation and waiting for you to call me when it's over. He looked at her for a long moment. That's not safe. Safer than being here alone if Corso already knows where I'm staying. He opened his mouth, closed it. You said no more deciding for me, she said. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. The building has a secure floor. You'd be with Miriam, no contact with the meeting itself. Agreed. And you do exactly what Miriam tells you if something goes wrong. That I'll consider case by case, she said. He looked at her with something that might, in a different context, have been admiration. You are the most difficult person I have ever negotiated with. You built empires through intimidation, she said. Doesn't work on me. I noticed, he said. 4.5 months ago. What? The call came at 2:13 in the morning, 4 days later. Catherine was awake. She'd been sleeping badly, which Dr. Reyes had predicted and which felt like no consolation at all. She heard James's voice through the wall, low and urgent, the specific cadence of someone receiving information that requires immediate processing. She was in the hallway by the time he opened his bedroom door. He had his phone in his hand, and his face had the look of a man who had just received the thing he'd been dreading for weeks. Corso knows, he said. She didn't ask how he knew. The meeting? Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. We're moving it up. That's 4 hours from now. Yes. She looked at him, at the controlled tension in every line of him, at the phone in his hand, at the way he was already somewhere else in his head, already managing, already 3 moves ahead. She recognized it. She'd watched it across 100 conference tables, and it had never frightened her before. Right now it frightened her. Because 3 moves ahead wasn't far enough, and they both knew it. Get dressed, she said. I'll make coffee. You don't have to— Shh! James. Her voice cut through. Get dressed. He went. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window in the dark and watched the water and let herself have 30 seconds of the fear she'd been containing for days, the specific physical fear of something going wrong in a way she couldn't control, of Corso moving first, of James walking into a federal building at 7 in the morning and not walking back out. 30 seconds. She counted them. Then she picked up the coffee mugs and turned away from the window. Miriam arrived at 4:30 in a cream coat and sensible shoes with the energy of a woman who had been awake for hours before receiving the call. She looked at Catherine, looked at James, looked at the coffee pot. I'll need a cup, she said. By 5:15 they were in 2 cars. James in one with his attorney, a man named Fitch, who had the quiet intensity of someone perpetually aware of potential liability, and Catherine and Miriam in the second, a black SUV driven by a man who introduced himself only as Pete and who navigated Fort Lauderdale's pre-dawn emptiness with the calm of someone who had done this before. Catherine sat in the back beside Miriam and watched the city move past the windows. He told you about Sophia, Miriam said. Not a question. Yes. I fought him on that decision, Miriam said. The negotiation. I want you to know that. She said it looking straight ahead, without self-congratulation. I lost the argument. He was 28, and he had just taken over a structure that would have collapsed without that partnership, and I understood his reasoning even as I hated it. I want you to know that I have hated it for 3 years. Catherine looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Because you're deciding how much to trust him, Miriam said, and I think you should have the fullest picture possible. He made a terrible choice under impossible pressure, and he has lived with it poorly, and he is trying to make different choices now. That is not a defense. It is a context. You sound like a lawyer. I've spent 30 years in rooms with lawyers, Miriam said. It rubs off. They rode in silence for a moment. Are you afraid? Catherine asked. Miriam considered this. I'm alert, she said. Fear is something I try to convert into attention. It's more useful that way. Catherine filed that away. What do we do if something goes wrong at the building? Pete takes us to a secondary location. We wait. We do not make phone calls unless Pete tells us we can. Miriam looked at her directly. And you do not, under any circumstances, attempt to contact James if we hear there's a problem. His phone goes dark the moment he enters that building. Standard protocol. His phone goes dark, Catherine said. Yes. And we wait. Miriam's voice was not unkind. That is what we do. The federal building was in downtown Fort Lauderdale, and Pete parked in a structure 2 blocks away at 6:45. They sat. James's car had already arrived. She'd seen it pull up before Pete turned into the structure. She'd watched James get out, in a dark suit, his attorney beside him, and walk toward the building's entrance with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders set in the particular posture of a man who had made a decision and was done reconsidering it. She hadn't called his name. He hadn't looked up. She wasn't sure if that was discipline or distance and decided it didn't matter. At 6:58, her phone showed James's number. One text. "It's going to be okay." Then the phone went dark, as Miriam said it would. She held the phone in both hands and looked at those 5 words. At 7:41, Pete's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, said nothing, and started the car. "What's happening?" Catherine said. "Change of location," Pete said. He was already pulling out. "The meeting is being moved. Don't worry." "Where?" "Secondary building. Fitch's call. Standard precaution." His voice was the same careful neutral it had been all morning. "Miss Vale, I need you to stop talking for a few minutes so I can take this call." He pressed his earpiece, listened, drove. Miriam's hand found Catherine's arm. Not dramatically, just a firm, quiet pressure that said, "I'm here and we're not panicking." Catherine looked at the city sliding past the windows, watched the streets change as Pete drove with practiced efficiency, taking turns she didn't know, heading toward a part of the city she didn't recognize. "Miriam," she said quietly. "I know," Miriam said. "This doesn't feel like a precaution." "No," Miriam said. "It doesn't." Pete pulled into an underground garage beneath a building she didn't know and stopped. He was already on his feet before she processed that they'd stopped moving. "Inside," he said. "Now, both of you." They went inside. A service corridor, fluorescent lights, the hum of a building's infrastructure. Pete moved them fast, faster than felt like a precaution, and Catherine's heartbeat was doing something that Dr. Reyes would have had notes about. They reached a room on the second floor, small, a conference table, 2 other men already there who looked at Pete and exchanged something silent. "Sit," Pete said. "Tell me what's happening," Catherine said. "James?" Pete stopped, started again. "Corso's people made a move on the federal building, not inside, outside. A car, a man who works for Corso, outside the building when James arrived." He looked at her steadily. "James is fine. The car was intercepted, but the meeting is compromised and we needed to move you." "Where is he now?" "In a secure location with Fitch and the federal team." "I need to know where." "Miss Vale, I need to know where he is." She stood up from the chair she'd barely sat in. "Right now, tell me." "He's safe." "That is not what I asked you." Her voice came out with a force that surprised her and clearly surprised Pete. "James made decisions for me without asking me, and I told him I would not accept that, and I am telling you the same thing right now. Where is he?" Pete looked at Miriam. Miriam said quietly, "Tell her." He told her. Said. The building was 12 minutes away. Pete drove, and he drove like someone who had stopped pretending this was a routine situation. Miriam sat beside Catherine in the back and did not try to talk her out of anything, which Catherine would remember and appreciate later. James was in a federal satellite office on the 6th floor of a building that looked, from the outside, like it handled tax assessments. Pete took them through a service entrance, past 2 men in suits who checked IDs with the efficiency of people who had been briefed, and up an elevator that opened onto a corridor where Fitch was standing with his jacket off and his phone in his hand and the expression of a man managing 11 things simultaneously. "She needs to wait," Fitch started. "I'm not waiting," Catherine said, and walked past him. "Miss Vale, the meeting is ongoing." "Then it's ongoing with me in the next room," she said. "You can manage that." She found a chair in a small anteroom off the main conference room. She could hear voices through the door, low, professional, the specific cadence of people building a documented record. She could hear James's voice among them, steady, careful, saying things she couldn't make out. She sat. She put her hand on her stomach. She breathed. The flutter came. Deliberate, unmistakable. She pressed back. She sat there for 47 minutes, which was the longest 47 minutes she had endured since the night she left Miami, and she did not get up, did not pace, did not do the things her body was urging her to do with excess adrenaline and no appropriate outlet. She sat still and she breathed, and she held her own hand against her stomach and waited. The conference room door opened. James stepped into the anteroom. He saw her. He stopped. He looked like someone who had walked through something. Not physically. He was untouched, but in the way that a person looks when something they've been carrying for a long time has been set down and the body hasn't adjusted to the absence of the weight yet. His jacket was off. His sleeves were up. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, not once in 2 years and 4 months, and she couldn't name it exactly, couldn't put a single word to it. "You're here," he said. "I told Pete to tell me where you were," she said. "He told me." "I'm going to have a conversation with Pete about that." "Don't. I would have found my way here regardless." She stood up. Her back ached with a specific insistence that she'd learned to read as her body's version of "you need to stop doing things and lie down." She ignored it. "Is it done?" "The initial record is complete. There are 3 more sessions over the next 2 weeks, but the primary documentation is done. Corso's operation is on the federal record." She looked at him. "And you?" "Formal immunity agreement pending, subject to the accuracy of the record." A pause. "Fitch thinks 72 hours for confirmation. And if someone moves on us in 72 hours? There are federal agents outside this building. There will be federal agents outside the Fort Lauderdale apartment. The situation has changed significantly in the last 4 hours. She nodded, absorbed it, looked at the floor, and then at him. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No." "The car outside the federal building." "It was handled before I was aware of it. The federal team had anticipated Corso making some kind of move. They were prepared." "You knew he might try something?" "Yes." "This morning, when you texted me?" "Yes." She felt the anger rise and let it. Not the explosive kind, but the slow-burning kind that was more honest. "You told me it was going to be okay." "I believed it was going to be okay." "That's not the same as it being okay." "No," he said, "it's not." He looked at her with the tiredness of a man who had been right about the outcome and wrong about the method of getting there, and knew both of those things simultaneously. "I should have told you there was a possibility of an intercept this morning." "Yes, you should have." "I was protecting me," she said. "I know. You have to stop, James. You have to actually stop, not just agree to stop and then protect me anyway when it feels necessary. I mean it." "I know you mean it." "Do you actually know that? Because this is the 3rd time in less than a week that you've—" "I know." His voice came out rough and not controlled, which was new enough to stop her. "I know, Catherine. I am trying to unlearn 26 years of operating a particular way in approximately 5 days, and I am failing at parts of it. And I know. That is not an excuse. It is what is true." She looked at him, at the roughness in his voice, at the fact that his hands were not entirely steady, which she had never once seen before. She said, "Come here." He crossed the small room, stopped 2 feet away. She reached up and put her hand flat on his chest, over the shirt, feeling his heartbeat, which was not steady, which was going at the pace of a man who had spent the morning in a controlled fear he hadn't let himself express. He put his hand over hers. They stood like that in the anteroom of a federal satellite office in downtown Fort Lauderdale, and it was possibly the least romantic setting imaginable, and Catherine thought she had never felt so entirely without illusion about who they were and what this was and how hard everything ahead of them was going to be. "I'm not forgiving you," she said quietly. "This is not forgiveness." "I know. I'm not. This doesn't fix the things that need fixing." "I know. But I need you to be alive, and I need her to have a father, and I need—" She stopped. "I need things to be different than they are." "They're going to be," he said. "They're already starting to be." Her phone vibrated. She pulled her hand back, looked at the screen. Unknown number. She answered it before James could react. "You made a mistake." Corso's voice, different than the pleasant, measured tone from 3 days ago, raw, stripped of the performance. "You don't know what you've put in motion, Miss Vale." She looked at James. He went completely still. "I think I have a fairly clear picture," she said. "You've handed James away to clean his name on the backs of people who kept his family running for 20 years. And you think you're safe now. You think federal attention means protection." A pause. Hard breathing on the line, the sound of a man who has lost something and is processing it at the edge of his control. "There's something you don't know," Something James didn't tell you. Ask him about the agreement he made with my people 18 months ago. Before you showed up pregnant, before the federal conversations. Ask him what he agreed to give us in exchange for letting the transition proceed quietly. Her eyes were on James. James's face had gone to a place she hadn't seen before. What agreement? She said. Into the phone, eyes still on James. Ask him, Corso said. Then decide how much you trust the man who says he's been changing. The line went dead. Silence filled the anteroom. Fitch was in the doorway. Miriam was behind him. Pete was at the corridor end. Everyone in the room was looking at James. Catherine took the phone from her ear, looked at the dead screen, looked at James. What agreement? She said. He didn't answer immediately. And in the gap where his answer should have been, she felt the floor move again. Not the unsteady feeling from before, but something harder and colder. The specific feeling of something she had started to believe being. What agreement? She said again. The anteroom had the quality of a held breath. Fitch hadn't moved from the doorway. Miriam stood behind him with her hands clasped and her face doing something careful and controlled that Catherine recognized as the expression of a woman who already knew the answer to the question being asked. That recognition landed first. Miriam, Catherine said. You know what he's talking about. Miriam said nothing, which was its own answer. Catherine turned back to James. Tell me right now, not in an hour, not after you've thought about how to frame it. Right now, in this room, with all of these people here, tell me what agreement you made with Corso 18 months ago. James looked at Fitch. Don't look at him, Catherine said. Look at me. He looked at her. 18 months ago, he said, I was in the early stages of the federal discussions. Corso became aware that I was considering cooperation, not the specifics, just the general direction. He came to me with a proposal. He said if I wanted to transition cleanly, without interference from his people, without anyone moving against my assets or against people connected to me, I needed to give him something in exchange. What did you give him? Information on 2 of his competitors, organizations that I had access to through the partnership structure. I provided documentation that allowed Corso to consolidate 2 operations that had been competing with his. A pause that felt like a stone dropping into still water. He absorbed them. The people running those operations were dealt with. I don't know the full extent of what happened to them. The room was completely silent. You helped him hurt people, she said, to buy yourself a clean exit. I gave him information. What he did with it, James. Her voice was flat and cold, and entirely without the anger she'd expected to feel, because the anger had gone somewhere below the surface, where it was quieter and more permanent. Don't finish that sentence. He didn't. She stood in the center of the room and felt everyone's eyes on her and felt the baby move. A full, rolling movement, not a flutter, the kind that had been getting more frequent in the last week as their daughter ran out of room and began making her presence felt with increasing insistence. She pressed her hand to her side. She did not look away from James. How many people? She said. 2 organizations. I don't know the individual count. Give me a number. Catherine, give me a number, James. He looked at her for a long moment. Based on what I knew of the operations, between 8 and 12 people directly involved in leadership. She absorbed this. She took it in and held it and looked at the shape of it and did not let herself look away from what it was. And that felt like a reasonable trade, she said. Your clean exit in exchange for those people. I told myself it was inevitable, he said. That Corso would have moved on those operations eventually regardless. That I was accelerating something that was already in motion. And did you believe that? A long silence. For about 6 months. And then? And then I stopped being able to sleep properly, he said. And I started moving the federal timeline faster than I needed to, because the longer I stayed adjacent to Corso's operation, the more I became the thing I was trying to stop being. She looked at him. At this man she had spent 2 years beside and 4 months running from and 2 weeks trying to understand. She looked at him with the full weight of everything she now knew. The Sophia decision at 28, the competitor information at 32, The years of managed secrets and careful omissions, and the specific, consistent belief that the end he was working toward justified the path he took to get there. She looked at him and she saw very clearly two things at the same time. The first was that he was not the man she had imagined when she fell in love with him. That man had been a construction, partly his, partly hers, built from the parts he chose to show and the parts she chose to see, and the significant gap between those two sets. The second was that he was not entirely the man she had feared either, in the darkest hours of the last 4 months, when she'd lain awake imagining the worst version of what she'd escaped. He was something more difficult than either of those. He was a person who had made genuinely harmful choices in a genuinely complicated situation and who had been living with those choices and trying, imperfectly and inconsistently, to become someone different. That was not a story with a clean moral. That was not a story where she got to be simply right and he got to be simply wrong. She hated that. She was going to hate it for a long time. "Here's what I need you to understand," she said. Her voice was quiet and even, and she was aware of every person in the room, but she was speaking only to him. "I cannot build anything with someone who keeps recalibrating what I'm allowed to know. You understand that the agreement with Corso 18 months ago is not, on its own, what breaks this. What breaks this is that I asked you, 4 days ago, to tell me everything. And you chose not to include this. I was afraid. I know you were afraid. You are always afraid of the same thing. You are afraid that if I know the complete truth, I will leave, and so you manage the truth, and the management is exactly the thing that makes leaving feel necessary." She watched his face while she said it, watched him hear it. "That is the cycle. Do you see it?" "Yes," he said, very quietly. "Do you actually see it, or are you agreeing because you think agreement is what gets us through the next 5 minutes? He looked at her with something raw and unguarded and tired. "I see it," he said. "I have seen it for a while. Seeing it and being able to stop it are not the same thing." "No," she said. "They're not." She looked at Fitch. "Is the immunity agreement affected by the Corso disclosure, the competitor information?" Fitch straightened. "That depends on the specifics and what's already on record. It's a complication." "Can it be managed?" "Potentially. If James discloses it proactively as part of the record, it becomes part of the cooperation rather than a concealed element. It changes the scope, but not necessarily the outcome." She looked at James. "Then you disclose it. Today. All of it. You put it on the record. That exposes me to additional—" "I know what it exposes you to," she said. "Do it anyway." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face that she didn't have an exact word for. Not relief, not gratitude, something older and less comfortable than either of those. It looked like the expression of a man being asked to do the thing he most needs to do by the person who least has to ask it of him. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to go sit with Miriam and drink some water because my blood pressure is probably somewhere catastrophic right now, and you're going to go back in that room and finish what you started." She walked past him, stopped in the doorway beside Fitch. "Fitch," she said without looking back. "He tells them everything. You make sure of that." "Yes, ma'am," Fitch said, with the tone of a man who had just recalibrated who he was actually working for. It took 4 more hours. Catherine sat with Miriam in a small room down the corridor and drank 3 glasses of water and ate a sandwich that Pete produced from somewhere without explanation. Miriam sat beside her and they talked, slowly and without urgency, about things that had nothing to do with what was happening in the conference room. About Miriam's early years managing the Virelli household accounts, about the city she'd grown up in, about the way Florida humidity never quite felt real to someone who hadn't grown up in it. At one point Miriam said without preamble, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would have left by now, for good." A pause. "Several of the situations in the last few days would have been sufficient justification." "I thought about it," Catherine said honestly. "What stopped you?" Catherine looked at her hands. "She did," she said. "My daughter. Not because I think a child needs 2 parents unconditionally, or because I think staying is automatically the right choice, but because I looked at what leaving would actually look like, really leaving, far enough that Corso couldn't reach us, far enough that James couldn't either. And I realized that the fear driving me out was the same fear that drove every bad decision in this situation. I'm tired of making decisions from fear. Miriam was quiet for a moment. That is a very clear-eyed thing to say. I've had a lot of time to think in the last 4 months, Catherine said. Walking away from your life gives you a particular kind of clarity. Does it? It also gives you a particular kind of loneliness, she said, which I'm less interested in recommending. Bolts. James came out at 2:17 in the afternoon. He came directly to the room where they were sitting, and he looked, Catherine thought, like a man who had been taken apart and not entirely reassembled, functional, upright, but carrying the evidence of something significant having moved through him. He sat down across from her at the small table. It's on record, he said. All of it. How did they respond? The lead prosecutor wants 24 hours to review the expanded scope. Fitch believes the immunity structure holds. The competitor information is significant, but it's also evidence against Corso directly, because Corso solicited it. It actually strengthens the case. So your worst disclosure turned into their best evidence. Fitch used the phrase fortuitous, which I think he found inappropriate immediately after saying it. She almost smiled. Didn't quite. What happens now? We wait for confirmation. Federal protection is in place. Corso's operation is, as of this morning's record, the subject of an active federal investigation with cooperation from the primary witness. He looked at his hands on the table. He's not going to move against us with that over his head. The risk calculus for him has completely changed. Is he going to be arrested? Within days, Fitch thinks. Possibly sooner. She sat with this. Tried to feel something definitive. Relief, maybe, or the specific satisfaction of a situation resolving. What she felt instead was a profound exhaustion, the kind that lives below the physical, in the part of a person that has been managing sustained fear for an extended period and doesn't know immediately what to do when the fear starts to lift. I want to go back to the apartment, she said. I need to sleep. I'll take you. James. She looked at him. I need to sleep, not talk, not process anything else today, just sleep. Okay, he said simply. And tomorrow I have a doctor's appointment. I know, 2:00. I'm going alone. He held her gaze. Okay. She searched his face for the thing she expected. The micro-adjustment, the slight tension of a man suppressing the instinct to offer an alternative. She found it, and she watched him suppress it without letting it out. And that, the visible effort of the restraint, was more meaningful to her than if there'd been nothing to restrain. Okay, she said. 3 days later, Corso was arrested at his primary residence in Boca Raton at 6 a.m. Fitch called James, who told Catherine over breakfast. She was eating yogurt and half listening to the radio, and she put the spoon down and sat with it for a moment. Is it over? She said. The immediate threat is over, James said carefully. The federal process is ongoing. There will be hearings. I'll be required to testify in person. There may be periods of significant public attention on the family name. I know. It is not a clean resolution. I know that too. She picked up the spoon, looked at it, set it down again. James, when this is done, the hearings, the testimony, whatever time you potentially serve, when it's actually done, what do you want? He looked at her across the kitchen table with the morning light coming through the windows and his coffee going cold and the specific quiet of two people who have been through something significant and are only beginning to understand the shape of what's on the other side. I want what I have right now, he said. A kitchen, coffee. You eating breakfast across from me and telling me I'm wrong about things. You are wrong about things. Frequently, he agreed. She looked at him. That's not a plan. No, he said. It's not. He turned his coffee mug in a slow circle. The plan is the holding company, legal, documented, above board. It takes 18 months to fully establish. After that, the Virelli name is attached to something I can hand our daughter without the weight of everything that came before it. He paused. That's the plan. What I want is separate from the plan. Tell me what you want then. All of it. He was quiet for a moment. I want to earn back what I wasted, he said. Not through gestures, not by solving problems or providing resources or managing situations. I want to earn it through the slow, boring daily work of being a person who tells the truth even when it costs something. I want our daughter to know me as a man who chose differently than his father, not because it was easier, but because she was worth doing the hard thing for. He looked at her directly. And I want you to trust me. Not today, not because I've asked for it, but eventually because I've stopped giving you reasons not to. Catherine looked at him across the table for a long time. She thought about the parking lot behind the Serafina restaurant 3 weeks ago, a lifetime ago. She thought about $43 and a phone thrown into a canal and a plan that was not a great plan, and the specific courage of a woman who packed one bag and decided that a half-truth was not the same as a whole life. She thought about a girl on a black and white ultrasound, curled and certain, who had claimed her space and intended to stay. I'm going to need you to get a therapist, she said. He blinked. I'm sorry? A therapist. Someone who is not Miriam, not Fitch, not me. Someone you pay to sit across from and tell the truth to. Because the pattern you have, the managing, the information control, the fear dressed up as protection, that does not fix itself. You can want to fix it all you want. It does not fix itself. He looked at her. You want me to go to therapy? I'm requiring it, she said, as a condition. A condition of what? Of whatever this is, she said. Whatever we're building here. Therapy, disclose to me, not the contents, just the fact that you're going consistently. And you don't make decisions about my safety, or my information, or my medical care without talking to me first. Not once. Not even when you think you know better. And if I do, make a decision without telling you. Then we find out what I do next, she said. I don't know yet. I'm not going to threaten a specific consequence because I don't know what I do, but I need you to understand that there is one. He nodded slowly. Those are reasonable conditions. They're not conditions for your benefit, she said. They're conditions for mine. For hers. She touched her stomach briefly. I'm not managing you, James. I'm telling you what I need. I know the difference, he said quietly. You're learning the difference, she said. That's not the same. He accepted this. She watched him accept it without deflecting, without the slight repositioning she'd learned to read as him finding a more comfortable angle on an uncomfortable truth. Okay, he said. Stop saying okay. What would you prefer? Something that indicates you've actually heard me. Okay is what you say when you're ending a negotiation. He looked at her. I heard you, Anne, he said. I'm going to do those things. Not because you're asking and not because I think it will change what you decide about us. Because you're right that I need them. A pause. Is that better? Yes, she said. That's better. She picked up her spoon, finished the yogurt. The radio was playing something quiet and indistinct, and the morning was doing what Fort Lauderdale mornings did in this season, all heavy gold light and the smell of salt air coming through the cracked window. I made an appointment, he said, at the facility in Hialeah, to see Sophia's care coordinator. I'd like to speak with them directly about what she needs. Catherine set down the empty yogurt container. When? Friday? I'll come with you. He looked at her. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She met his eyes. I want to. Because it matters, and because you shouldn't do that alone, and because... She stopped, found the true end of the sentence. Because I want to see who you are when you're facing something you can't fix. That tells me more than any of the rest of it. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. That's the most frightening thing you've said to me. Good, she said. You should be a little frightened. Frightened people pay attention. Awesome. Grace Varelli was born on a Thursday morning in late November in a Fort Lauderdale hospital room with a view of the parking structure and a nurse named Darlene, who had the specific, magnificent competence of someone who had done this 10,000 times and never found it unremarkable. Catherine labored for 11 hours. James was there for all of them, which she had not decided in advance she wanted, and found, in the actual event, that she needed more than she'd expected to need anything. He did not try to manage it. He held her hand when she wanted it held, and he stepped back when she told him to step back. And at 4 in the morning, when she told him, very specifically, that she was going to kill him if he said, "You're doing great," one more time, he said nothing at all and handed her ice chips, which was exactly the correct response. Grace arrived at 7:43 in the morning, making herself known with the unambiguous urgency of a person who had been patient long enough. Darlene placed her on Catherine's chest, and Catherine felt everything she had been carrying for 7 months shift and rearrange itself around this new weight. Small, insistent, smelling of something she had no word for, looking at her with the unfocused but somehow searching expression of a person who had arrived somewhere and was beginning the long work of understanding where she was. "Hi," Catherine said. Her voice came out wrecked and soft and completely unguarded. "I've been waiting for you." James stood beside the bed. She didn't look at him immediately. She was looking at Grace. But she felt him there, the particular stillness of him, and after a moment she reached out her free hand without looking, and he took it, and she felt him squeeze once, hard, the way you hold on to something when you don't have the language for what you're feeling. She looked at him then. He was looking at Grace with an expression she had never seen on his face in all the time she'd known him, and she understood in that moment that she was the first person in the world to see James Varelli look like this, unarmored, undirected, without strategy or management or the performance of control. Just a man looking at his daughter for the first time and not knowing what to do with the size of it. "She has your nose," he said. His voice was not steady. "She has your stubbornness," Catherine said. 11 hours. He made a sound that was almost a laugh and not quite. "James," she said quietly. "Yeah. This doesn't fix anything. I know. We still have a lot of work to do. I know. And I'm still angry at you for several things. I know that too." She looked back at Grace, who had found Catherine's finger and wrapped her own around it with the absolute commitment of someone who had decided on a direction and was not reconsidering. "But she's here," Catherine said. "So we figure it out." "Yes," James said. "We figure it out." The immunity agreement was finalized 6 weeks after Grace was born. James's attorneys negotiated the scope down to a structured compliance period. No incarceration, a monitored business transition, and a formal cooperation agreement that required 3 separate testimonies over 8 months. The Varelli name was attached to the transition company, and the company's first board meeting was held with documentation that Miriam had reviewed line by line and declared with the dry satisfaction of someone who had been waiting years for this particular outcome, acceptable. Corso's trial began in the spring. James testified on a Tuesday in March in a federal courtroom that smelled of old wood and institutional carpet, wearing a charcoal suit and speaking with the specific, careful precision of a man who had practiced telling the truth until it no longer required practice. Catherine was not in the courtroom. She was at a coffee shop 4 blocks away with Grace in a carrier against her chest and a sketchbook open on the table. Her first serious attempt at drawing since Miami, since before everything, her hand moving in the tentative exploratory way of someone relearning a language they've neglected. She sketched the coffee shop, the window, the street outside. She sketched Grace's hand, tiny and relaxed against the carrier fabric, the fingers slightly curled. She sketched from memory a thing she didn't have words to explain to anyone else. The anteroom of a federal satellite office, a man with his sleeves rolled up and his hands unsteady, saying, "I have been losing my mind for 4.5 months," in a voice that had stopped performing and started simply telling the truth. James texted her at 11:47. "Done. Fitch says it went well." She texted back, "Come get coffee. I found a place." He arrived 20 minutes later, still in the charcoal suit, looking like a man who had set something down that he'd been carrying for a long time. He sat across from her. He looked at her sketchbook, then at Grace, then at her. "Can I see?" He nodded toward the sketchbook. She turned it toward him. He looked at the drawing of the anteroom, of himself. "That's how I looked?" he said. "That's how you looked." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't recognize myself." "I know," she said. "That's why I drew it." He looked at her. "Catherine." "I started therapy." "I know." Dr. Harmon's office confirmed the standing appointment. He blinked. "You called his office." I called his office, she confirmed. He confirmed you've attended 6 consecutive sessions and have a standing Thursday appointment. He didn't tell me anything else. I didn't ask. He looked at her with the expression she'd been cataloging since Grace was born, the one that appeared when she did something that surprised him, something that demonstrated a kind of attention he hadn't expected anyone to pay. You checked, he said. I told you I was requiring it, she said. I don't make requirements I'm not willing to follow up on. No, he said. You don't. A pause. Are you going to keep checking? Probably less as time goes on, she said. If the pattern holds. And if it doesn't, she picked up her coffee. Let's work on the pattern holding. He signaled the server. Ordered coffee, black, the same order he'd always had. The coffee shop was busy with its mid-morning crowd. People with laptops, a young couple arguing quietly over a menu, a man at the counter reading a newspaper with the focused devotion of someone who had committed to the analog. Grace made a sound against Catherine's chest. Not crying, something more exploratory, the sound of someone testing a new capability. James looked at her. She's going to be loud, he said. She's already loud, Catherine said. At 3 a.m, she's exceptionally loud. You should have woken me. I did wake you. You were useless. You stood there making a face and then walked into the door frame. He had the decency to look embarrassed. I haven't had an uninterrupted 8 hours in 6 weeks. Neither have I, she said pleasantly, and I'm the one who went through childbirth. You're going to reference the childbirth forever. For at least a decade, she agreed. He smiled. It was the kind of smile she hadn't seen in the restaurant that first night. Not the slow, deliberate one, not the one that had learned to function as a performance. This one arrived by accident, the way real ones do. She did not tell him she noticed it. She looked at her sketchbook. There were things that were not fixed. There were apologies that had been made and accepted in the narrow, specific sense of being acknowledged, without being resolved in the larger sense that resolution actually requires time to build. There were conversations they had not finished. There were mornings that were still hard and nights that were still long, and a pattern in James that was in the process of being dismantled slowly, imperfectly, with professional help and consistent effort and occasional failure. None of it was clean. All of it was real. She drew his coffee cup, the table between them, his hand resting on the edge, the knuckles, the specific geography of a hand she had spent 2 years occasionally watching across conference tables, and 4 months trying to forget, and several weeks relearning as something different than what it had been before. James, she said. Yeah. We're going to fight about a lot of things. I know. I'm not easy to live with. I haven't found that to be true. You've known me under extraordinary circumstances, she said. Wait until everything is ordinary. I'm particular about the kitchen. I leave books in unreasonable places. I will argue with you about things that don't matter because it turns out I have opinions about most things. I look forward to it, he said, and she heard that he meant it. She looked up from the sketchbook, looked at him across the table in the mid-morning coffee shop with the ordinary noise of the city around them and Grace breathing steadily against her chest, and the sketchbook full of the evidence of a woman who had started, very carefully, to live again. You know what my daughter asked me once, she said. When she's old enough to ask, she's going to ask how we got here, how we ended up together after everything. What will you tell her? Catherine thought about this, about the parking lot and the $43 and the phone in the canal, about the tray with 2 plates of risotto and the moment she turned around, about a piece of paper with a doctor's address and a man crouching to her eye level in a federal anteroom saying please without anything holding it up. I'll tell her that her father was a difficult man trying to become a better one, she said, and that her mother was a stubborn woman who refused to leave until she'd seen enough of both to know the difference. She paused. And that neither of us was easy or perfect or particularly reasonable about any of it. That's accurate, James said. And that we chose each other anyway, she said, not because it was simple, because it was worth doing the hard thing for. He looked at her across the table. The coffee shop moved around them. Grace shifted against her chest, small and absolute and entirely herself, the way she had been from the beginning. The thing they had not planned and could not have imagined, who had arrived anyway with the certainty of someone who knew they were wanted even before anyone had found the words for it. Catherine, James said. Don't make it into a speech, she said. I wasn't. You had the face. I don't have a face. You have a face, she said. I've been studying it for 2.5 years. You have a face you make before you say something you've been composing. He was quiet. Say the uncomposed version, she said. He looked at her, at the sketchbook, at Grace, back at her. I'm glad you didn't make it easy, he said. That's all. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned the sketchbook to a new page, started drawing his face. The unguarded version. The one that arrived by accident, the way real things do, when a person stops performing long enough to simply be present in the room with the people who matter. Outside the coffee shop window, Fort Lauderdale was going about its ordinary business, the city moving at the pace of a Tuesday in March, indifferent and continuous, as cities are. Inside, a woman drew with careful attention while a man drank his coffee and watched his daughter breathe and understood, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, that this ordinary, imperfect, fully visible moment was the only thing he had ever actually been working toward. He didn't say it. He didn't need to. She was already drawing it,